Hello everyone, I am getting on here today with a fellow colleague who is a life intuitive coach named Shanel to talk all about the impact of love bombing. So before I dive into talking a bit about what love bombing actually is, this is a topic that I think is quite relevant because I know a lot of my clients have struggled with when they're faced with love bombing, particularly if they've come from a family where they didn't receive a lot of consistent love. So when they meet people who overwhelm them with a lot of love in their life, which quite honestly can be quite fake, it can be very overwhelming for them, and they often think that they found their partner or their soulmate, and it's rarely the case. So today we're going to be discussing how love bombing can be the first stage, Chanel's here, of narcissistic abuse and what it can do within a relationship dynamic. Hey Chanel, how are you going?
Hey, good. Go ahead and finish your intro. Fix my setup over here.
That's totally fine. I didn't really say all too much because I figured I'd save the meat of this episode or live to chat with you. So, while you're here,
I'm excited.
would you like to share
I
with
I've actually
everyone who
had
you
so
are?
many people excited about this. Yeah, so well, I am recently switching my social media presence, but I am a intuitive life coach, so I'm really getting into like helping women like as a whole really connect back with their intuition and set foot into their next chapter of life. And I feel like a lot of women have been in bad relationships, so this impacts so many of them.
Ooh, I think we've just lost Chanel for a second. Hopefully, she'll be back shortly. While I'm just waiting for Chanel, as everyone's coming back through here, hello to everyone who's just joined live. We're here today talking about the impact of love bombing, and it's my hope that we can convey the difficulty that happens when we enter a bad relationship when love bombing does occur, because it's quite scary. And I think a lot of us end up not thinking that we're actually made out or cut out for love when we're in a narcissistic or abusive relationship. So I'm just going to see if I can get Chanel back on, and hopefully everything will be okay. Yeah, I don't know what happened to Chanel. Hopefully we can get you in and everything will be hunky-dory. There we go, you're back.
I do not know what happened. I've never had that happen before. Have you had that happen?
Occasionally. I'll put it
Well, you do
down
more
to
lives than I do.
I'll put
Mercury
it down to Wi.
retrograde.
It's Wi-Fi things. It just happens. But anyways, sorry. Please continue.
So anyway, basically, I feel like relationships, toxic relationships, and then if we want to really get into specific of like, narcissistic or just, I feel like a lot of toxic relationships have what we're going to talk about. So we don't
Oh
even
yeah.
really need to throw the narcissist word in there. But yeah, I just think that has such a huge impact on women as a whole, um, trying to navigate like all aspects of their life. So I'm so excited that we're going to talk about it.
I completely agree. And I think that, something that I resonate with what you do is the fact that you are an intuitive life coach. And I'm very much a big, big champion of getting people back in touch with their intuition. So for those of you from your audience who don't know me, my name is Ken. I am a holistic healing coach, and I really work on mind body work to help people to get back in touch with their authentic selves, to help them to overcome the trauma that they've experienced, whether it be from narc abuse, from life, in order to live a happier, healthier life, and also to attract healthy relationships into their world too. Because real love is very different from love bombing, which is a very different thing. So I guess to get started, do you have a definition for love bombing that you want to share with everyone?
Oh gosh, put me on the spot. I guess to me, you probably have the actual definition. To me, love bombing is using hmm, it's using gosh, there's so many different aspects. Okay. As a whole, I would say love bombing is manipulating someone's desire for love to gain control.
I think that's a fairly solid definition. I would add,
Yeah.
you know what? I think that's absolutely right. And I think to add to that too, it's on the receiving end, very overwhelming. It can be incredibly uncomfortable too. I think that most people who have come from families where they receive a lot of conditional love and they're given a lot of flattery on the first date can often feel swept up by the excitement and think, oh my gosh, this is real. This someone finally sees and appreciates me for who I am. But the reality is that we don't really know anyone on a first encounter. It often takes at least a few meetings with someone to really get to know and appreciate someone. And I think that it's hard when we go into these, we're on our first date and we're meeting with people and then they, give us all this love bombing attention and makes us feel like, oh my God, I've met my soulmate, when in fact, it's often the start of an abusive relationship. Oh, I think Chanel's just backed out again for 1 second. I don't know what's going on there. Hopefully she'll be back on shortly. What I might do is continue chatting about love bombing, seeing as though I can talk about this one with a lot of depth. So basically, to continue on, love bombing is a really dangerous experience for a lot of people who haven't had a lot of consistent love in their childhood, and as a consequence, they often feel as though they're being swept up in the
I'm so
experience.
sorry.
That's okay, you're back.
I took off my Wi-Fi, so hopefully, like, this is better. We'll see.
Yeah, and look,
So go
worst
ahead.
case scenario, we can always reschedule if we need to
Okay,
as
okay.
well. So there's no drama on my end as well. But
Okay.
yeah, just to wrap up my piece on love bombing, it was really just to say that I think that it is one of those things where it's often the start of a narcissistic relationship. With your previous experience, do you feel like you've experienced that or any of your clients have experienced that?
I feel like, and I'm curious to what like your experience has been like on the receiving end and as like a coach, but for me, like in hindsight, like it was so different. I've been with several toxic people, so it was different each time. I can only think of one time where it was like, and I was a teenager, but I can only think of like that was the time it was like so blatantly obvious in hindsight, like the gifts and like the letters and like just everything. And it did like really mess me up long term. But I would say with my most recent like 5 year like toxic marriage, the love bombing part didn't come in super hard until like the abuse cycle. Like it really
Mm.
wasn't that much at the beginning. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on like how it looks different from like the beginning of dating to like how that transitions to like when you're deeper in a relationship and that cycle is happening. You get what I'm saying?
I do, yeah. I think that similar to yourself, probably when you were in high school, I had a situation where I had a guy who I dated who was very hot and heavy in the beginning. And I think because at that point in time, I'd had enough self esteem, it just came across as really weird and confronting. Like, I had a situation where basically on the second date, I was offered to come up to the guy's office to see the view. And I was like, no, actually, I don't want to do that. That's not something that feels right for me on a second date. Then on the third date, I'm being presented with a gift, and it was thoughtful but weird in the sense that I'm kind of like, I've just met you. I don't feel like I've deserved this. And with that in mind, I want to be very clear. When I say I don't feel like I deserve this, it's not a self-worth thing. It's not being like, oh, I don't feel like I'm worthy of gifts. It was very much a, you don't know me. I don't actually feel comfortable receiving something so quickly because on the receiving end, it's like, what have I done to like earn this? And the other thing too is for the other person, it's very self-abandoning because it's kind of like, oh, I invest so much of my time and effort to, to win you over because I don't believe I'm good enough to actually be appreciated for who I am. And the third thing that he did, which is where, it was the straw that broke the camel's back, was we're about 3 weeks in and he said something to me like, oh my God, you're the most amazing guy that I've ever met. I'm so grateful to know you. And I said, mate, way too soon. Like, I feel really uncomfortable getting a compliment this early into dating, having someone share that with me. And then it started a conversation about me apparently being, you know, I think the way he phrased it was, well, maybe, we're just not cut out to be in a relationship if you keep, feeling that I'm, you know, uncomfortable towards you. And I remember thinking, man, are you trying to guilt trip me into, being in a relationship with you like that? That's really uncomfortable. And when I separated myself in 48 hours and really wrote about it, I was like, this is just a really uncomfortable situation and I'm going to back away from it, which is what I did. Only to be told, oh my God, you're so disappointing. I wish you all the best, and you just hung up on me. And I remember thinking, you know what? I'm actually really glad I stepped away from that. Now, whether the guy was a narcissist is neither here nor there. The point that I'm really trying to convey is it feels really forced. It feels like admiration instead of appreciation. And it feels like the other person doesn't have any self regard for themselves because they need to try and prove themselves and win you over. And it's gross.
Okay, so I have a alternate point. Do you feel like you have like secure attachment style?
I do now, yeah.
And back then, what kind do you think you had?
Back then, I'd feel like I did. I mean, I definitely didn't feel like, if this is where you're leading it, I definitely didn't feel like I was leaning into more of like an avoidant attachment.
No, that's not where I was going with it. I just had this realization recently myself because I think I started dating someone toxic again, and I had to really take a hard look at myself to like acknowledge that. But I will say I recognized it so quick, like within 1 to 2 weeks. I'm like, wait a second, something's not right here, and it was kind of a shocking realization, but at the same time, like I guess showed a lot of growth that I could recognize it. But anyway, the point is I lean towards anxious attachment, and I would say I have secure attachment, but like certain situations can like trigger me a little bit back to that, you know? And
Mm.
I was thinking about it, and I think a lot of women who get involved with these kind of partners, and this is my experience, or just not even women, just anyone with like more anxious attachment style, like, so I don't know if you've heard, but like anxious attachment has a conscious fear of uh, abandonment and an
Yes.
unconscious fear of emotional intimacy. So, with that being said, love bombing is almost like I can get someone to love me without them actually getting intimate with me. So they never have to see me, and I think that they love me. So it's almost like a magnet because I don't ever have to show myself, and they're gonna sit here and love bomb me. And I'm not even thinking like your point is valid, but when you're so like thrilled that someone can quote unquote love you without actually seeing who you are, you're not thinking about the fact, oh, it's kind of weird that this person loves me so much and doesn't know me.
100%. And to add to that, to what you just said too, many of these people who love bomb, ironically enough, also have an anxious attachment too, because by trying to win you over and to prove, themselves to you, it almost becomes like a thing of like, I'm scared now to lose you, and I'm going to guilt trip you if you don't appreciate what I'm doing for you. And it starts entering into that passive aggressive power play of trying to, one up the other person through manipulation. And I think that many abusive people, particularly narcissists, do carry an anxious attachment style. That's half the reason why they keep coming back to their exes, because they have real abandonment wounds and issues and they can't deal with it.
Yeah, like I think, yeah, I think both partners just like know how to like trigger each other in the right spots to where it's like the codependent thing is happening. But um I wanted to ask you kind of because I know someone asked me this and I have my own like thought after researching a little bit, but I kind of want your opinion. Like, what is the difference between someone being like genuine or like maybe just a little needy versus love bombing?
Ooh, good question. Uh, would this be in the context of like a first date or
No, like
when you
probably
got
like a
sober?
boyfriend, like dating, like to where they're like, I just love you so much. I can't wait to see a future with you. I have someone like I know going through this, and she asked me that, and I was like, that's kind of a good question because to me, like it just seems like this person's needy, like a little bit, maybe a little bit anxious attachment or something. But because I don't really see any other narcissistic red flags, but I thought it was a good question.
Okay, great question. I would probably say in a moment of where things are not feeling good between people. Like, say, for example, you're in a relationship dynamic, you got a boyfriend, a girlfriend, a boyfriend, a girlfriend, and a girlfriend. And say one of them is feeling a little bit, you know, anxious because they aren't getting communicated with consistently. In that dynamic, here's the difference between the three that you asked: needy, love bombing, and genuine. So the needy and the love bombing ones can kind of go in like hand in the sense that the needy one might be like, why don't you text me more often? I don't understand why you have to go out all the time with this person. Why is it that you're always talking to these other people instead of me? And so it's very accusational. It's very much just like throwing a grenade at the other person, hoping for them to diffuse it, which it never does. It just pushes the other person away. But then here's where it can evolve into love bombing. The other person, so the needy individual in this case, or the person with the needy behavior, may escalate the situation into a fight because that's their way of having control. That's their way of feeling empowered within the experience. Then once everyone has like calmed down and gotten the whole thing out of their system, the person who initiated and started this whole fight in the first place may then come back 24 hours later being like, I love you so much, here's a gift. And it's really jarring for the receiver because they still haven't processed their emotions from the previous night. They're like, what the hell? We were at each other's throats just a minute ago and now you're giving me a gift. I don't understand what's going on. So it can really confuse a person and make them feel like they're going through emotional whiplash and they're at the control of that individual with very manipulative behavior. Now, where it's genuine is everyone will experience a level of anxiety in a relationship. Like, I'll talk about my thoughts on attachment styles in a minute, but like, it's normal, I think, to have like imbalances every now and then. So when you're looking to, for want of a better expression, correct the imbalance, you might say, hey, listen, I just need to let you know, I feel a little bit uncomfortable and anxious when I don't get the opportunity to hear from you on a consistent basis. I was just hoping we'd be able to check in at least once a day. Because what you're doing there is you're saying, this is how the dynamic is making me feel. I'd like it if we can just talk about, an agreeable change. And that's a boundary setting. That's really just working through that. And if the person genuinely wants to meet you at the other end without, having an excuse or not wanting to meet you, they'll go, you know what? I didn't realize how much my behavior was impacting you. I'm so sorry. What do you need me to do? And they'll work towards that. And that is where you can really build up love because you feel seen and heard and you feel like, oh my God, this person really genuinely cares for me and wants to put effort into this experience. So that's where I would put the distinction.
Okay, yeah, I like that. So, so then so genuine would just be like, oh, okay, this actually is not asking for a friend. This is like actually for a friend. But like if someone is doing, maybe they're genuine and it's like happening a little bit too much, like do you have like a way of handling that without like making them feel bad about it?
So in that case, would there be a person who's like excessively asking for more attention?
They're not really asking, they're just like making like declarations or statements like excessively. Like if it was me, like I was like, that would literally drive me insane.
Oh, it would drive me insane too. Can you give like an example of like how that would be playing out?
Like just it's almost like reminding them like how much they love them, or like asking them like, well, this is what I love about you, what do you love about me, like that kind of stuff. Would that seem more needy to you? To me it does, but I don't know.
To me, that suggests low self-esteem and also a lot of fears around abandonment. And so for me, it can manifest in needy behavior. What I would say in that case, if you wanted to work around that, the real question becomes,
She might be watching this, I'm not sure.
I
No,
think,
not her, but like the girl who's like struggling with
oh,
this she like asked me about it. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, well,
Sorry.
it's a good question to ask. I have worked with someone like that before, and I think the key thing there would be to ask yourself, what is bothering you about this experience that you feel the need to consistently ask about this? Because there should be no need to consistently have to ask those questions because they rise out of anxiety. And I think that I mean, we all have anxiety. I think that, it's one of those things where it's just like, what's causing you to feel bothered by this? And what do you need to do in order to work through that? Because if you're asking the question, do you love me? It's a useless question. And it really also is a very dangerous one to ask because you're essentially saying, I don't feel that you love me. And I feel like I'm not lovable enough. And I feel as though you're going to walk away from me. And it's kind of like setting, yourself up for failure because you're almost looking for evidence to prove that the other person doesn't love you at all. So you're kind of stepping on your own eggshells in a way. So I'd say that's both a boundary challenge to work through as well as a emotional regulation challenge to work through. And this might shock people. That's a sign of emotional unavailability because you're not communicating your emotions.
Oh, that's a good one. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah.
Like maybe like because I actually just recently learned like I didn't know. I feel like I'm a super self-aware person despite my toxic relationship history. Um, I did not know until very recently that I was not emotionally available because I would have thought that I was because I'm so like such an oversharer and like such a like anxious person. I would have thought if I wouldn't have delved deeper into it that if someone asked me this like months ago, I would have been like, I am like the most emotionally available person I ever was. And then it took him to find out I'm like, I'm actually not at all.
It's a scary thing to realize. Well, I think, my first question to you would be on that one is what would be your initial definition of emotional availability?
Like, I guess, oh gosh, you're getting me with these questions. Being, let me think about that for a second. Being willing to taking the risk to be seen so that you can receive love because you can't really receive love if you don't ever really be like let yourself be seen.
I think that's a fairly accurate way of putting it. And I think
But
in
I
terms of
guess,
like,
well, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. I guess like people who tend to like wear their heart on their sleeves, like me, like I think because we have this like baseline of like information we're willing to share with people that seems like it's intimate. Like I can literally tell you about like whatever my childhood, whatever, like heart on my sleeve. But then when it actually comes down to it, like I mean, I've been working through this a lot like the past few months, but like there's like a baseline you hit where like I don't open that up ever. Does that make sense?
yeah, it does. It does. So it sounds like there's a scope to which you'll talk about certain things that are vulnerable to you, but you won't open up beyond that particular point.
Yes, yeah. And so
Yeah.
that's where I think some people may think that they're more emotionally available than they actually are.
Yeah. Makes
Yeah,
sense. And I think that's a lot of people's definitions. I actually really like what Cody put down here being
yeah.
confident to show your emotions whilst also being attuned to your partner's emotions. So here's my definition of emotional availability. It is the ability to speak about the most uncomfortable emotions you have inside of you with no attachment to how the other person might react or respond. It's the capacity to be true to your feelings and your feelings alone and be like, I feel uncomfortable. I feel scared. I feel anxious. I feel bothered. I feel ashamed as a consequence of this experience. I'd like to talk about this. And it's knowing full well that you have the ability to speak about your intuition, like when something doesn't feel right. To give you a really, this is a bit of a private example, but I'm happy to share it. I had a situation a couple of weeks ago where I'd actually started to develop feelings for a straight man, and he was a colleague of mine, and I knew straight away that this was not something that I could allow to continue on because it was just going to impact me too much because he's in a relationship and it's nothing that I even wanted to pursue. And though we'd never done anything romantic or crossed boundaries with one another, it was very much in a situation where I was like, this is just not healthy for me and my heart. So emotional availability requires us to be able to take ownership of how our emotions are making us feel, given our environment and the people that we're interacting with. In that instance, as soon as I felt that, I instantly said, we need to have a chat. And I said, listen, I need to be honest with you. Something has come up that's been a complete surprise to me. I've actually started to develop feelings of fondness and love for you. And as a consequence of this, I actually feel like I need to take responsibility for these feelings. And I'm prepared to walk away because this is not healthy for me. And so what it's doing there is demonstrating ownership of the emotion and also what needs to happen in order to get you back to a level of inner peace and stability. And I think that part of the reason why we struggle to have those conversations is because we have an understandable fear about how the other person may respond and react to what we're sharing with them. So that's how it works, in my opinion.
That was so good. Can you talk? I do have an example to share as well, but before I go there, I want to ask you because if I put myself in this, like in a similar situation, I could see my fear not, I think, yeah, like ex fearing what the other person's how they're going to react is one, but also and I'm sure other people feel this way too. Like I have just a fear of like never seeing the person again or like completely ending it. Like that's really hard for me, even though I know that it's like what would be best.
Yeah. And that right there is exactly what you just said. It's, I have a fear. And that's then an opportunity to communicate with your fear and to be able to actually go deep into that and be like, okay, well, what is it, inside of me that worries about that? And having a conversation and actually, potentially writing about it and being like, well, where's this feeling coming from? How does it make me feel? And also, what does it mean for me? Because this is the trick, I think, for a lot of people. On one hand, we resist these emotions because we're so worried about the outcome of what could potentially happen. Like, oh God, if I let go of this person, what does it mean for me and how I'll possibly be in the future? Or to give another example too, sometimes people who are with a partner will often have fantasies of previous partners and they think, oh my God, I'm being unfaithful to my existing boyfriend, girlfriend, because I still have memories of a previous person that I was with. And here's the trick that helps a lot of this is your feelings are feelings. They mean nothing. It's just something that needs to be allowed, like smoke up a chimney. You just need to allow yourself to sit with that feeling of uncomfortability, that feeling of fantasizing about a previous ex. And just as you sit with that in your body and you become an observer, kind of like how Eckhart Tolle talks about thoughts, it's the same with feelings. If you just sort of allow yourself to sit with it or write about it, which I find more effective, what you're then able to come to is that place of indifference where it's like, I no longer feel attached to this particular instance or this event. Like I know, okay, another example is when I was going through the grieving process of that, technically that professional breakup, one feeling that came up for me was loneliness. And I just wrote about it and I'm like, I feel lonely. And as I got that through my chest, 2 minutes later, I'm like, and I don't feel lonely anymore. And so I think the struggle is we often assign meaning to the emotion when in fact there is no meaning to our emotions. And so what we're creating in assigning meaning is resistance, and we don't allow those feelings to leave us.
That is so good because, yeah, yeah, I'm the one who will be like, well, what does this mean? And then, like, and I don't, I'm sure you know, but I have read that, like, an emotion actually only lasts 90 seconds. It's like we, like, latch onto the emotion and, like, drag it out. Like, I
Yeah,
could drag an
correct.
emotion out for, like, a week.
Yeah, I think that idea that like an emotion lasts 90 seconds is erroneous because many of us don't.
Like, don't let it last 90 seconds.
Absolutely.
Well, yeah, but I think it's the understanding that like we get to choose how long we let that last by like
Absolutely.
how we feed it. Yeah. So that's crazy. Yeah. I mean, this is good. Because I feel like you're teaching me like because I'm in a situation now where like I know I need to like cut it off and like I have this fear like I just it's like yeah like even though I know that I need to it's like I don't want to so I just like distance myself. But yeah, it's like the waking up to the reality of the situation is hard. But like my example, because we can talk about intuition, and I guess we're kind of getting off the topic of love bombing a little bit. But
Well, maybe we're not because we are talking about like a distinction between like real emotions versus like fake emotions.
yeah, yeah. So for me recently, and this is a lesson I'm learning and I'm writing it out, but um kind of like how you're saying you became aware, like you're starting to have like feelings for somebody. Well, this person was talking to me about like an ex or something, like telling me a story, and all of a sudden I started to feel like I couldn't, it's like I knew I was like wanted to cry, but like I couldn't figure out why. So like as he's talking, I'm like, why am I so upset right now? So it's like I'm trying to analyze like what's bothering me, and I'm like, am I jealous? Like think I'm jealous, or like I think I'm sad because I think you like somebody else because we're talking about an ex that much. Like you're not really over it. Like I'm just like having all these rapid fire thoughts, and I'm like, my gut and like my first reaction is like my impulse is like just shut it down. Like oh no, like I'm not doing this. Shut down instead of like that vulnerability of like communicating your emotions. Because like God forbid you like tell somebody that they're making you jealous or like like you would think that was like some form of like torture for some of us. So I had to let the whole thing play out where I didn't express how I was feeling. Or what's funny? You can tell me what you think about this because this has been a huge learning experience for me. I thought that I was being vulnerable. This is kind of how I had this epiphany, is because I was like, okay, I'm going to communicate right now. This is an opportunity to communicate. So I had that thought. So I was like, okay. So instead of communicating my emotions, I like almost like attacked. Like I like not, this is what I said. I was like, I don't think you're ready for a relationship because you're not over this chick. And that's not communicating. In hindsight, that's not communicating my feelings at all. That's just like wanting him to validate me without actually without communicating my emotions.
So in that context, was there a situation where you felt like the person you were seeing or you'd fallen in love with, had they been distancing themselves and reminiscing a lot about a previous person?
He wasn't distancing, but like he almost got on this tangent where he was like talking about it for a very long time in detail. And that's when I started to be like, okay, he's like really into this, like really upset about it. Like, and that's my instinct was like, or maybe my intuition was like, and maybe the assumptions were or were not accurate, but I feel, and you can tell me what you think when your intuition comes in, like regardless of what is going on in his head, my intuition was telling me that I was feeling something that I should have spoke up about. But instead of expressing like what I was feeling, it was more like just attack and then expect them to tell me I'm wrong so I feel better.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what a lot of us do, like to relate to what you just did, like I think that's what so many of us do because that's what we've been taught. And I think that, it's not to say that you don't have the capacity to be emotionally available or the capacity to be vulnerable. I think, Shanel, what that is maybe just a difference in language and being like, hey, listen, I'm just getting the feeling that perhaps there's more going on here than, just reminiscing. I'd just like to know, is there something that's potentially coming in the way of connecting with us? Because I'm feeling a sense of, I suppose, distance from being able to connect with you if this is something that's still being continued, and just exploring it from there. And I think it all starts with with changing a lot of our language. Like one thing that I found has been really empowering is no longer saying you when I start my sentences and just saying like, I feel this, because no one can debate your feelings. No one can debate whether or not, you feel something is necessarily right or wrong, which means you've got defense against gaslighting from people who are obviously narcissists and want to try and, convince you otherwise. And so I think that a lot of this is just learning. And I think that, given the circumstances, I probably would have reacted very similarly. And I mean, it's a very uncomfortable thing to do, but I think this is the thing they don't teach, is that good communication is fucking hard. And when people are like, oh, why can't we just communicate better? It's because it's really difficult to actually have these uncomfortable conversations.
Yeah, and especially we can go back to like toxic or narcissistic relationships. Like something I've realized, like it's hard for me to communicate what I want or need or feel because for so many years, like that backfired. Like they make you feel like it starts with this huge fight, and like when you have like complex PTSD from like all the fighting and abuse, it's like I'm not gonna say anything that's gonna cause a fight or cause me to be like abused verbally, emotionally, whatever. So I'm better off not communicating at all.
100%. And I think you just learn that from those experiences, which is the worst thing about it too, because that's your baseline. That's what you know. So you're taking the survival skills from a narcissistic relationship and trying to put them into a future experience. It's obviously, you know, it's difficult to create a healthy, understanding relationship that makes you feel seen and heard off the back of all of that.
Yeah, and like, because I talked to some women that are they do, and I've done it. I do it too. I think we do it subconsciously, but even consciously, like they bring each past relationship trauma into like the next, and
Yes,
like, uh, how can you connect and communicate and have a new like standard of a relationship you want if you're still coming at it like this is how what I tell myself, like I can't expect something better or different if I'm not willing to like open up again and like practice. Like to me, it's just like practicing. I have to practice being vulnerable and like practice communicating and like all of that. And like
absolutely.
when you test it out enough, and if a healthy partner reacts like in a healthy way, then you learn you're safe. But you can never learn you're safe if you're not willing to try.
Absolutely. And I think
Yeah.
that the other thing to add to that too, Chanel, is that I think that we are so conditioned from narc experiences to just, please them in order to feel safe and to kind of just shut them up and be like, okay, whatever you say. And so, as a consequence, if you're ever dating someone where you like them a lot and they don't react well to vulnerability, the instinct for a lot of us is to just put up with how they react to it without realizing, wait a minute, how am I feeling right now? I'm feeling really uncomfortable with the fact that this person's just invalidated how I feel and they're not willing to work with me on this. And so it is a combination, I think, of like unlearning the trauma of those narcissistic experiences and also just trying new things with the expectation that some people are just not ready for a healthy relationship.
Okay. I'm like throwing all these questions at you, but being back in the dating scene, like I guess it has been enlightening. But because I was talking to a friend about this too, what you just said, like if you recognize like someone, if you're like I won't say I'm like the perfectly like obviously I'm willing to share like things I still am working on, but like even working on these things is far ahead of people who don't want to acknowledge them at all. But when you recognize someone's just like not going to be able to meet you where you need them to,
Mm.
because I had someone, well, actually, it's the same person, tell me, like, well, I just don't understand why people don't communicate what went wrong so we can learn. And I'm thinking, well, because you're going to argue with them about it, that it's not true. Like, why? So they're like, I just don't get why people ghost and blah, blah, blah. And I thought about it myself because I have a tendency to do that when I see it's not going or how I think it should go. Like, I don't want to even explain myself because I don't want to open myself up to like, well, that's not true. You're blah, blah, blah. And then you're like back in this whole like circular argument. So, like, how would you recommend like cutting it off with somebody in a constructive way?
Great question. The first step I often find is boundary setting. So, what I find is one of the most powerful things to do for the human brain to let go is to state a boundary and say something like, listen, I like where things are going, or I like elements of what's happening here. I just need to let you know that when this doesn't happen, it makes me feel this. I'd appreciate it if we can do more of this because it would make me feel really secure. And then the purpose of doing that is in your brain, you know that if that individual can't live up to that and can't perform to what your expectations are, it's naturally going to cause you to feel disappointed. And when you feel disappointed, you feel contempt for the other person. Contempt is the root of all relationship deaths. And so when that happens, it becomes a lot easier to mentally and emotionally separate yourself from the person because you're like, huh, I can't even get my needs met with this individual. So why on earth would I want to continue this? And so that's when you can do one of two things, depending on, how you create boundaries for yourself. Is like, okay, how much time am I now willing to invest to see if this individual can actually live up to the expectations that I've set? Not ridiculous expectations, just baby step expectations. Because if your request is simple as, I just like to hear from you once a day, it doesn't have to be much, it can just be hello. you know, and they can't even do that. It's like they can't even do the
Yeah.
bare minimum. That's pretty telling in terms of how their, you know, behavior is. And so it then becomes a lot easier then to mentally separate yourself and emotionally separate yourself from the individual that you're seeing.
Yeah, I like that. It's so smart. It's kind of like parenting. Parenting is like that too. You tell a kid a boundary because you can't really punish them if you never told them what the boundary was.
Well, that's exactly right. And I think the reason why so many people ghost is because it's conflict avoidance. They don't like the idea of, you know, having those conversations with people because they're so worried about what those people might say back to them.
Yeah, I mean, especially in defense of narcissistic, like for me, my worst fear, because I'm always like, well, I don't want to tell this person, like, like, if I say, well, you're just not going to be able to meet my needs, then it's like, what if this person is like, well, you're just, well, like, I probably won't even happen, but like, my worst fear is always like, what if they just like go off on me, like, bully status, like, well, you're just fat and ugly anyway, or something. Like, I don't know, like, I'm like, I would just rather avoid any of that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think you make a really good point, which is I think every relationship circumstance is different because if it's an abuser, that's when it's kind of like, you know, is that really in your best interest to go back there with a conversation about this? For me, I'm the kind of person where I like to have conversations with a person. I've been fortunate that I've never really had an abusive partner who I'd been with in a long-term relationship, thankfully. And being able to cut it off in the early stages without much emotional investment has always been healthy for me. But I think that it's hard to feel safe and try and close a relationship off in a conventional way, particularly with a narcissist, because they can't handle it. And that's why grey rocking is such an effective method in terms of just being boring as possible to make them inevitably choose another partner to be with and to get rid of you, because it's almost a softer way of handling the situation to help you get your strength back.
Yeah, I like that. Okay, I have another question back to the love bombing topic. Um, can you talk about, and I'll like talk about my experience too, but like how love bombing could actually be like with actions and not like necessarily like words. Like I'm not maybe not words, what am I thinking? Like what are like more subtle ways of love bombing, I guess is what I'm trying to say. That's like not so overt like gifts and like these like super like lovey-dovey texts or whatever.
Yes. And it's all in a lot of the actions that can happen in the early stages of dating. I've got an example of a client who's actually going through a bit of this right now, and they were really working well through it. But I'll give you an example. You just start out by meeting someone new, and you're just connecting. And you know how a bit ago you were sharing how you have a tendency to overshare. Well, what can happen is if that has been a classical way of getting to know someone is to be vulnerable with them to the degree that you're sharing a lot of personal details that bring up a lot of emotions. That is when the other person can then feel invited to shower you with compliments, being like, oh my God, you're amazing. I love the way you've handled that entire situation. And before you know it, the date, which was meant to maybe only last 2 hours, is going for 12 to 15 hours, and you're both in bed with one another. And you've just had what I call these like micro boundaries that have just been crossed. You know, you've gone in his car, her car, you are talking about, you know, what the future might look like in a relationship, and you're starting to then talk about, you know, all the ways in which you feel like you've known each other for a while, and how the connection you've had is greater than any other connection you've had. And the reason that connection and chemistry may be so damn intense at that stage is because that level of vulnerability is actually quite unhealthy for both parties, because it's you're crossing each other's boundaries very early on, and you're essentially becoming almost caretakers very quickly for one another too. And so you almost lose yourself in the other person. And it's kind of like in an alcohol analogy, you've just had 9 drinks straight on an empty stomach. And you think to yourself, oh my goodness, I've never been so drunk before in my life. It's because you've gotten far too close too quickly, and you don't have any boundaries for yourself in terms of how you want to protect yourself. So often the telltale sign that you'll often get in those early stages, particularly on first dates which go for that long, is intense butterflies. Many of us assume that the butterflies means love. It actually is our body's way of saying danger. So that's why I think many of us don't listen to our intuition, because we've been conditioned to believe that it means something else.
Yeah, okay, so touching on that, because I know that's true. Can you distinguish like how do you distinguish like excitement or like nervousness from like fear and butterflies? Because I think that's where people get caught up. You know what I'm saying? That for me
Yeah,
anyway.
well,
Like
they're exactly the
really
same
like
thing.
yeah, because they feel the same. So like because I remember telling someone like, well, if I don't get excited, like what's the point?
Yeah, that's what everyone says. And that's the thing, is that, like, for instance, when I've developed emotional connection with guys that I've dated or been with or seen, it's been a slow burn. I've been interested in the person, but I haven't felt this like intensity to it, to the point where I'm thinking about them all the time, where I'm, worried about, the future of the relationship. It's subtle and it grows gradually, where I'm like, it's kind of like when you're getting to see a friend for the first, like after a few times, like, and you're like, oh yeah, I genuinely enjoy this person's company. So the feeling is often one of, satisfaction, ease, joy, feeling stable. Whereas when it's more extreme, you feel like you're on a knife's edge, and you tend to feel this intensity leading up to seeing the person. And even when you're with the person, whilst that can usually calm you down, it still feels quite intense, especially when you leave the individual too. So it almost becomes like an addiction. So the
Mm,
trick, there's two parts to this. It's really important to register your nervous system and to heal from a lot of the trauma, because most people who end up falling for the excitement of the chemistry is because they have a dysregulated nervous system. These are the high achievers, the stressed out individuals, the single mums and dads who are so used to overworking in order to make a living. And so if your basis is looking for distraction because you can't handle the intensity in your feelings, then naturally it's very easy to look for the next exciting thing, from Netflix, drugs, alcohol, sex, and even really intense toxic partners, because you're all operating at that heightened, nervous system state, which is the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight. Whereas when you're in rest and digest, you're far more sensitive to when you're being pulled in that direction. And it's just like, yeah, that doesn't make me feel good. And it's the same too if you feel overwhelmed. So going back to when you were saying, you have a tendency to be more on the anxious side, I look at attachment theory very differently now. Instead of being like, oh, I'm an anxious, a secure, and avoidant, I don't believe that. I think what actually happens is we're on a spectrum. We all want to get close to the secure baseline. And I think what happens is that we can have a tendency to match with people who are on opposite ends of the spectrum when we're not feeling secure inside of our body. And so we label ourselves according to how we're feeling. Again, going back to labeling our feelings, thinking, oh, I'm an anxious attached. It's like, no, you're not. You're just someone who may have a dysregulated nervous system. So that's why you get hooked to the chemistry of these particular environments or these people. And so like, for instance, for me, I can consider myself secure, but there are guys that I date who will make me feel anxious or avoidant. And it's because it's imbalanced. It's got nothing to do with my attachment style, because I don't believe such a thing exists. I think it has everything to do with the interpersonal dynamics.
yeah, that is so good that you said that because I was feeling like that too. I'm like, if someone's like needy and clingy, like I feel avoidant. If someone is like giving me mixed messages or like doing that kind of toxic stuff, then I get anxious. And like, yeah. And then I remember at one point I'm like, okay, well, am I both? Because then that means I have a disorganized attachment style, which is like the worst of them all. Like, so then I'm like, So I'm glad you said that because that's a really good like perspective.
Mm. Well, I think a lot of us definitely get confused with that because I think the quizzes, like, the the attachment style quizzes are limited because we tend to look at like significant patterns that we've had in the past and think, oh my God, this is who I am. And it's true. I've had combinations of both. And I used to think, oh my, I have that disorganized attachment style. And I'm like, no, wait a minute. It's just the individuals that I've been with because attachment styles exist also outside of relationships in the sense that they also exist with friendships and family too. I know I show up with my family, I used to, in a much more avoidant pattern of behavior because it was just too overwhelming for me. And that's gradually become secure because the dynamic has changed. So, what we're really trying to do in relationships is to establish whether we can be secure together. Because if you can't, and you're going to feel continuously overwhelmed with the avoidancy or anxious due to the anxiety, the question ultimately becomes, do you want to live with that?
Yeah, that's a good point. Like how soon into a relationship do you think you can make that call?
That's a really good question. I'd say one thing that I've introduced for myself and also for clients is a probation period. So it's again getting in with your like boundaries, being like, after a month, am I still feeling this way? Am I still feeling like to give you an example? I remember I dated a guy at the beginning of the year who was lovely. Like he did all the right things, and I just felt nothing for that experience. In fact, I felt exhausted turning up, and I thought to myself, is this a trauma related thing? And then when I dug deep, I'm like, actually, no, it's not. It's just I don't feel I don't feel invested or interested in seeing this individual because I feel overwhelmed. And so that was enough information for me to be like, after a month, I said to him, look, I've got to be honest. I'm really not feeling what I want to feel. And I've talked about, feeling this already 2 weeks earlier. So I'm going to back away from this and wish you all the best. Because by that point in time, if you set a boundary in place and they still haven't been able to accommodate that, then chances are they're not going to suddenly learn overnight. You can give a second chance if you want to, but I think for me, I'm just like, nah, I'd rather let this go. And then if it works out in the future, it works out in the future, but I'm not going to hold on to it. And then I think also with like, okay, on the anxious side. So I dated a guy again earlier in the year who presented really well on the first date. Like he asked all the right questions. What do you want in a relationship? What are your values? What is it that you're looking for in a partner? And I was like, oh my God, this person's great. And after making out at the end of that first date, I was thinking, I'm excited for this. But I will not lie, I felt this level of anxiety starting to build up inside of me. And I was thinking, oh, okay, where's this coming from? And it became clear because he was inconsistent in messaging me. And so I sent a message to him when he got back to me after like 48 hours. And I said, hey, listen, I remember on the first date, I said, if we're going to date, I do like consistent communication. And that for me means at least, a text once a day. I'd really appreciate it if I can get that. And he ignored that component of my message. And I remember thinking then, right, I have no reason to trust this individual anymore because they haven't listened to me. And love is about being seen and heard. So why on earth would I invest in someone who can't even respect a basic need? And it turns out that when I did meet that guy again, without sharing the whole story, that ended up being a complete, I suppose that really revealed him for who he was. And I wasn't as shocked based on the fact that he'd ignored that boundary the first time. So I was ready to walk away being like, I'm not even shocked. So yeah, that's how I think we can save ourselves a lot of time, a lot of grief by just being honest with when we're feeling that sense of imbalance.
Do you feel like that is a form of love bombing in itself, is like showing up in a way that's not like, to me that feels a little manipulative when someone shows up to a date, pretend like act, maybe it's not love bombing, but like acting in a way that is not actually in alignment with who they are because they think that's like what the other person wants or needs.
I think it's disingenuous. I think that I suppose I can give you a bit more clarity on that case. So he would later go on to tell me that he'd actually been seeing another guy 3 months before even meeting me on that first date, and that he was more invested in being with that guy because, interestingly enough, the guy that he'd been seeing for 3 months was feeling jealous that he was dating other people 3 months after they were still together. And he decided to share this information with me. Um, but you asking, like, is that disingenuous or is that, like, a form of love bombing? I would say subtle love bombing. And I'd also say really disingenuous because it's like, man, you've got someone who's interested in you and you're still dating at this point in time. That really shows how emotionally unintelligent you are to your own needs and to a potential partner. And the fact that you just disclose that to me on the second and last time we're seeing each other, bad boundaries. Shouldn't have been dating in the
Yeah.
first place.
Yeah. Wow, this is so good. I feel like I could just keep asking you questions because I love like getting another perspective. But yeah, I just feel like something I've seen like just since being back in the dating world is like I it's almost like, and maybe this is my own like anxieties, but I just feel like people don't even show their true colors right away. And that's not, I don't think that's normal. I think it's normal to like have boundaries with like how much you're sharing on a first date, but like I feel like there's a difference between that and like pretending to be something else, or that you want, or that you're a different way, or like they'll be texting you all the time and like super interested, and then it's like, then later it's like, I don't know if you know what I'm saying. So I think a lot of, just from like talking to like friends and stuff like that, like it's like the, what do you call it? Like just probably what we were saying, like the like being disingenuous. Like, can I even trust that like they are who they say they are? I don't know if you know what I'm saying.
Can I even trust that
Like,
they're going to show up? Yeah.
or like, is this even like, am I even investing in this person, or is this just like a the job, like obviously it's like the job interview version, but like don't text someone like all day, or not even all day, but like this volume, and then like that's not even actually how you are in real life, because then it's like setting the standard a certain way. Don't you feel like that? I don't know.
It's a great question. And I think that I would say that the trouble for a lot of us, this might hit deep for people who are still listening to us and to those who watch this as an IGTV later, is I think many of us are showing up in different ways because it makes us feel safe. So, in other words, I think it's very, like, think about it like this. We all show up differently. Well, not all of us, but we mostly show up differently to people like our parents, to our friends, to certain individuals in our lives, to coworkers, because it's the safe personality we've created in order to show up in those environments. It's not the true us. So I think people who haven't really done their work, and by work I mean their inner work, will struggle with dating because they show up in a way that feels safe but isn't the real them. And that real version may only rear its head once the honeymoon period is over, once everything feels a bit more settled and secure. That's why narcissists, are such excellent manipulators and they're so charismatic because they know they've crafted these personalities because it's what gets them the love and attention they think they deserve. And so as a consequence, they are often the most, I don't want to say successful daters because that's not entirely right, but that's why they're so good at love bombing, because they know all the right things to say to get people to feel a particular feeling, to fall in love with the creation of who they're not.
Yeah. And I gotta ask you if you've had this, like, if you have anything to say about this, but I was talking, because I'm still in therapy myself, probably living my whole life from, but I was talking to her about it, and I was like, because we were talking about like past relationships, because I noticed like my past was, even though I thought I had, I have healed a lot, but like I've expressed tonight, like sometimes it still like rears up and I want to like work on it because I don't want that to be an issue, because I do want to do the work. And so we were talking about it a few weeks ago, and she's like, well, like what attracts you to that personality type? And like one of my first things was like, well, the consistency. Like they are so consistent at the beginning. Like they will literally like set a date with you at the end of the first, like at the end of the last date, so you don't ever have that anxiety of like, when am I going to see this person? Do they even like me? Blah, blah, blah. Like that's so alluring in like today's age where you don't even know what's happening.
100%. 100%. But I think, our minds do funny things because I think that you're right. You're right. Like we love the consistency because many of us have grown up with very inconsistent love from people. So when it's given to us consistently, we eat that up because we're like, we haven't had that before. And I think that as a consequence, when there's a shift in the dynamic, we then think, oh God, like, what have I done? And we put it all on us. And I think what I can say is that once you've done some inner work, the question no longer becomes, what did I do? It becomes, why do I feel really out of whack? Like, why do I feel imbalanced? And what do I need to do in order to restore my equilibrium? Because this isn't feeling right. And so it becomes less about them and more about us. And it means you also find that you are able to get out of these toxic dynamics if it truly is a them issue. Usually it always is. And I think that many people do feel quite alarmed at the change in behavior between these individuals, and their mind races to conclusions being like, well, if only I could get them back to, who they used to be. But the reality is that was never who they really were. They're bored. It's so much work to maintain a persona that's not real. I've been on dates back when I was not a healed individual, and I would pour so much effort into just taking people out and giving them a good time. And I'll be honest, it was draining because I was like, I've run out of ideas. I don't know what else to do. So is it any surprise that a narcissist starts to blame you for their problems because they can't handle the fact that they couldn't deal with it?
Yeah, that's such a good point. It is a lot of effort to even like, I'm not a narcissist, but like I could think like when I was dating like 18, 19, 20 years old, like I would pull out all the stops, like cooking, cleaning, like all this stuff, and it's like that is so much effort, like right up front. Like why? And then I'm
It's
not
too
even
much.
actually like that, so it's like I just made this dude like me, and I'm not even like the cooking, cleaning type. Like, let's be real here.
Yeah, exactly. So I think the problem that a lot of us have is the fact that we show up differently to these dates because we think that's what's going to get us the most amount of attention and likes. But ironically enough, that's what backfires and causes us to be in these toxic relationships.
Yeah, so good. Yeah, I love all of this, but I know we've been on here for a while, but we should totally do this again, and I can try to hone it in next time on a topic because I got like all over the place, but I love talking about all of it. So
Yeah, no, it was really good. I have to say, like, it was good to talk about a lot of this stuff as well. One last thing I'll answer. I see Har Beauty 6 asked the question, is it normal for first dates to be very long and a person is love bombing you throughout? No, it's not normal. Like, that's definitely not normal. And I think the first thing I'd say to that is, if a date is fairly long and we're talking outside of 2 to 4 hours, chances are things have gone to an extreme level where it's probably, you're crossing some serious boundaries there. So that's my observation.
yeah, uh, I have like not me, but like sometimes I have to set boundaries for myself to like cut things off if I feel like that's always a possibility of happening, like having other plans or like something like already scheduled, so like it doesn't go down kind of way I don't want it to go.
Yeah, I'm the same way. Now, I was just going to say, out of respect for my own boundaries, because I do have to run very shortly, I was going to
Oh
say,
no, okay.
Chanel, thank you so much for today and having the opportunity to talk about the impact of love bombing. I know we went a little bit off topic, but I don't mind. Like, I mean,
Okay.
I always shoot the shit with people, so it's okay. Where can people find you if they want to learn more about what you're doing?
They can just follow me over on Instagram because I'm all over the place, but that's the easiest way. So just click on me over down here, wherever it's at.
I'll tag you in this so that people can
All right.
find you. For
All
those of
right.
you already find me, I'm at ken.reed.co. And yeah, thank you very much for coming. I really appreciated it.
Thank you so much. Bye.
See you, Chanel. Bye bye.